a fully Meisner-trained Lyft driver. Who was in an off-Broadway play once. That was neat. He is the creator of a very special episode, a curated comedy storytelling show based on 1980s television. And next show is Friday, February 20th at Spirit Studio in Silver Lake. And then he moves to Business. He's appeared on television on WGBH Boston, NBC New York, and VH1. As a storyteller and comic, he has appeared on Risk, Radio Picture Show, Bobby's Storytelling Show, and the PEZ Show, just to name a few. Give it up for Jonathan Brad Brandon.
What? With chest? Thank you. Okay. Real quick, my celebrity thing that happened to me was I was walking in New York when I lived in New York, and Joanna Lumley, who plays Patsy in Absolutely Fabulous, was walking next to me, and I started panting. I was like, I didn't talk. Renaissance. We're gonna go historic. Nobody's done that before. I'm glad I get to teach you all. The Renaissance era. It's a gorgeous, elegant time in human history, and we point to it in modern culture fairly often as a time when the senses of our mortal existences were awakened after a period of some bullshit. Serious bullshit. The art, the literature, the beauty of a world reborn fascinates anyone with a shred of a creative brain. Now, for those unaware of that time period, the Renaissance took place throughout Europe between the 14th and 17th centuries, bridged our modern times to the previous Dark Ages or medieval period. The Dark Ages were great and all, but humanity as a whole by the end of the 1300s was like, we got it! So, some Italians, because it's always the fucking Italians! Some Italians kicked off a huge age of discovery, and all this beauty popped up, and the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles painted life, and love, and passion. They were all reborn again. It was the Renaissance. The Renaissance, yes, sprung forth new life, and as the Pointer Sisters would sing a few years later, a new attitude, because, did they sing that? I don't remember. Because the Dark Ages weren't fun for everyone. The Black Plague ripped through the land, killing everyone you ever loved. Bit by bit, their limbs would turn black. And those who weren't left over, or those who were rather left over, mourning in this period of disease and loss and fear and disease and fear and disease. They would walk down crowded, congested village streets where maidens would throw chamber pots out of second-floor windows, spreading the disease even further. All of this reminds me of my relationship with my ex-boyfriend, Jason. I was in a transitionary period of my life. The Dark Ages meeting the period of rebirth were in tandem with one another, overlapping all over each other's shit. Jason to me was the boyfriend in your early 20s that you know makes no sense, but you do it anyway. It meaning him. And you do it/him a lot. A lot. But what was it about him, though? Jason was opinionated. Jason hates, abhors, detests more things than Jason likes. In fact, Jason isn't even his real name, but this piece of work is such a self-described Anglophile that I thought to myself, gee, what kind of all-American New Jersey Stars and Stripes Springsteen-knocking, trash-kicking name could I give him all these years later, and Jason had to be it. Jason hated everything, even kinda eventually me. We dated for about 6 months and would visit each other in our respective homes. He'd come to Boston, I'd go to New York. He'd tell me which 8 out of 10 Broadway shows he hated, and I'd start drinking from a flask to brighten the moment. Eventually, he refused to visit the pedestrian banality of Boston and would cocoon himself in his apartment in Upper Manhattan, surrounded by his macabre decor, and judging me for having friends who didn't so much as cross the street in style of Baryshnikov. It was actually, yeah, wrap your head around that. It's hard. It was actually maddening to me. And for the first time in my 24 years, I was questioning everything about myself. Was I witty enough when he had a few friends over? Did I look okay and sophisticated when we stepped out to go to a show? To Chipotle? To the bodega? When I was little, all my references were born from era-specific television. I remember hearing adults on shows lament about how awful their partners were, even if it was just a short-lived relationship consisting of a few dates. The daughters on Empty Nest would sit over coffee and tell each other that dating so-and-so was impossible and it needed to end, but the sex was so good, the sex, ugh. A dumb fucking cliche, that is. Dating Jason, plain and simple, was just terrible for me. It was atrocious to my self-esteem, lacked substance and a substantial connection, but the sex was so good, oh my god, what's happening? Constantly feeling on guard, though, and not good enough was just so foreign I didn't know what to do with myself. I had, up until that point, only dealt with the burden of how awesome I was. Nicknames were given to me in college just because I was a great guy. But now some puke I was having sex with was threatening to take all that away. Some little puke who, when I landed a regional commercial, reacted by calling television furniture. This little asshat, who I call Little Boy, he was actually like a little bit taller than me and reasonably built. I mean, he had a dancer's build, but was way more muscular than your typical dancer. What was I doing? What was I doing? Admittedly, you guys, I was a little crazy. I was a little crazy over Jason. Being slightly elitist actually put a chip on his shoulder that made him kind of charming, and I hate to admit it, but he had this whimsical, semi-British air about him, which, you know, when paired with his physical beauty, preserved his rapidly deteriorating, redeeming qualities. Always just go back to the sex. We always go back to sex. Empty Nest writers weren't entirely wrong. For Jason had the kind of penis you want to bring home to your mother. Since my mother died 2 weeks before he and I met. It's fine. Anyway, that's not what I'm telling you all about. But since my mother died 2 weeks before we met, that wasn't really an option. So instead, I just placed all my vulnerability at a tense and difficult time directly into his hands. His beautiful hands. Despite Jason being the teensiest bit of an egomaniac, he did care about me. He actually loved me. He was in love with me, which he revealed to me the last weekend of our relationship. I took the Amtrak from Boston, and somewhere in Connecticut on a Friday night, Jason called me and told me we weren't working. Well, no fucking shit. Now, this news, first off, wasn't news, and secondly, could have been delivered and discussed before I blew $200 on round-trip travel. I was on my way to spending a weekend with him, and now the last thing I wanted to do was go anywhere near him. But he worked to convince me that I shouldn't jump off the train, and since it was in motion anyway, and I had no interest in living a hobo's life somewhere outside Hartford, I agreed that I would keep my travel and lodging plans, though I knew this weekend would be a little bit less than pleasant. It was hard to face reality and see that someone who was so physically important to me was so emotionally bad for me, but since I kind of knew it all along, I was willing to take a few licks to become a better person for the struggle. But not after I would actually take a few licks from Jason. He actually licked me. I walked in his door, and within moments his tongue was on my skin. And the elephant in the room had dissolved into an intercourse situation, and I was emulating a pogo stick with a 5 o'clock shadow. When all that was over and done, that's when Jason trapped me under his legs and told me he loved me. Now, since I studied Kathleen Turner in War of the Roses as kind of a spirit animal, I pushed him off of me and screamed, "I hate you! I hate you!" And thus the theme of our weekend was determined. By Sunday, I wanted to throw him onto a set of subway tracks, but my limited connections in New York left me sleeping with the enemy. The enemy, adamant that he loved me, convinced me to go to Fort Tryon Park with him that day. I had just one more day before catching a train and getting away from him, so I complied in the interest of making a lasting, more positive memory. I was interested in putting this relationship behind me and rekindling my own positive sense of self. That is, after all, the essence of Renaissance. But you guys, Renaissance has taken on other meanings in our current culture. Perhaps you're thinking of, with your bare hands eating turkey legs, people with poor social skills wearing capes in broad daylight, and adults with desk jobs dressing like they're on that dream sequence episode of Moonlighting that took place during the Shakespearean era. I was walking head first right into it, because Jason, in all his brooding moodiness and love of cultures gone by, was taking me to the Renaissance Fair at Fort Tryon Park. If any of you like Renaissance fairs, get out. Nothing makes me angrier than wearing velvet on a humid day. Also pretending to joust. Jason, of course, knew that. And that right then and there was the definitive end of our relationship. Well, not exactly. He left his G-chat open later that evening, revealing, perhaps on purpose, that he brought me to the Ren Fair to make me angry. He didn't want to end what we had on his own, and it was his plan to come across as the good guy, the pragmatic guy, and in the process hurt me. I think it's a byproduct of being young, dumb, and hung, and in love, or if I'm being more accurate, lust. Obviously, this taught me something, or I wouldn't have spent hours writing this on the floor of my apartment, in a coffee shop, or on the toilet with a rocks glass shamefully full of whiskey. I've come full circle from that relationship, that weekend, that morning at a fucking gag me Ren Fair. Good men aren't going to pretend to be too good for you, and if you are dating one who's pretending to be too good for you, then it's okay, because in order to get to the Renaissance, ladies and gentlemen, we must go through the Dark Ages first. And sometimes, on the other side of it, there's a giant turkey leg waiting for you. Thank you.